Live. Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. It is 8:40. We are beginning a new parak today. Baruch Hashem. We're starting parak Hayashen Tachas Hamita. This sugya had come up in the first parak. We discussed it briefly. Today we're going to discuss it in more depth. We're going to be starting at the new parak on Kaf Amud Beis, about 15 lines up, and we'll be ending last word on the page of Kaf Aleph Amud Beis, which will then lead us to Thursday night, which will be Mir Tzashem at Tzvi Perlman's house. I think his address is 3040 Sherwin. I'll post it in the group when he tells me what it is again, just to make sure. But we will be having him there along with Rabbi Robinson to give Divrei Chizuk afterwards. All of them, all of Rabbi Robinson's shiurim are being recorded and posted in their own playlist of preparation chaburas for Rosh Hashanah. Let's get started with this new parak on Kaf Amud Beis. Hayashen tachas hamita b'sukkah. There's a machlokes tanaim. If a person sleeps under a bed that's within a sukkah, so the Tanna Kama is of the opinion lo yotze yedei chovaso. Why are you not yotze the mitzvah of sukkah if you are underneath a bed? Rashi, the first Rashi in the parak, dibra mascha lo yotza, because the ohel mafsik beino levein sukkah. You're in a house within a house. You're in an ohel, a halachic tent. Not to be misconstrued by any tents that we have within our mind, because they're very halachically defined. They have to be 10 tefachim tall. In some cases, maybe they have to have a tefach at the top. Okay, whatever the discussion is there, but this is considered to be an ohel according to the Tanna Kama. However, there's a dissenting opinion. Amar Rav Yehuda, no again hayinu. We had the custom shehayinu yeshenim, that we would lie underneath tachas hamita bifnei hazakenim, that we would lie underneath a bed within a sukkah on sukkahs. V'lo amru lanu davar. And the Chachamim didn't say anything to us, and that implies that if you lie under a bed in a sukkah, you can be yotzei yedei chovasa, you can fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa of sukkah by being in a sukkah, even under a bed. Okay, so that's the machlokes, and now we're going to see one more opinion in the Mishnah, which agrees with the Tanna Kama. Amar Reb Shimon, 4 lines into the new parak Kaf Amud Beis. Amar Reb Shimon, Ma'aseh b'Tevi, Avdol Shel Rabban Gamliel. Tevi was the Eved of Rabban Gamliel. Shahayashen tachas hamita. He was sleeping under a bed. V'amar lehen within a sukkah. V'amar lehen Rabban Gamliel is a Canaan. Rabban Gamliel said to the people who were around him, Ra'isem, you saw Tevi Avdi Shehu Talmud Chacham. He knows what he's talking about. He grew up in my house. He, when you sit at the ankles of people who are great, you pick up a lot. You pick up a lot. Even if people aren't great, you also pick up a lot from them too. But certainly in halacha, if you're going to be sitting next to Rabban Gamliel, you're going to pick up a lot. So v'yodeya, and he knows she'avadim p'turim min sukkah, that an eved, like a woman, they're p'turas from mitzvos aseh shazman grama, that he is going to be patur from the sukkah. Lefichach yashenu tachas hamita. He was making a point. It was bedafka. He was lying under the bed to show everyone that you can still lie under the bed within a sukkah as long as you're not chayiv in the mitzvah of sukkah. Implying, of course, that if you are chayiv in the mitzvah of sukkah and you lie under a bed within a sukkah, the halacha is you will not be yotzei. And from this path, what did we learn? Like the Tanna Kama. So Shita number 1 and Shita number 3, the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon are of the opinion that if a person lies under a bed that is within a sukkah, they cannot fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah while lying under that bed is considered to be an ohel. And if you have a valid ohel within a sukkah, and you are within that ohel within a sukkah, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. Masha'en came the middle sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. He was of the opinion that you can fulfill you can fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah even if you are underneath that bed. Starting at the Gemara, 6-7 lines from the bottom of Chaf Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. You have a bed, you're lying underneath it, but and as Rashi highlighted, you're concerned about ohel, but ohel has minimum requirements. V'haleika asara. But if the height underneath the bed, if the cavity between the floor and the bottom of the bed is not 10 tefachim, that's not an ohel. So that's what the Gemara says. V'haleika asara. How can any of this be the case? According to the shitas that say Shita 1 and Shita 3, the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon, who say that if you lay under a bed in a sukkah lo yatzei yedei chovaso, but that's only true if it's an ohel. But who says that underneath the bed is 10 tefachim? Says the Gemara, Tir Gemashmal b'mita asara. Relax. The bed is 10 tefachim, and therefore it is considered an ohel. So it checks all the boxes of ohel, and therefore Shitas 1 and 3 in the Mishnah are validated that the bed that is within this sukkah is at least 10 tefachim tall. We're going to jump into a new sugya and then come back to our Mishnah briefly. Tanan, Hassam. We have a Mishnah that writes as follows. Echad chor shecharuhu mayim. Let's say there was a hole that was dug by flowing water, and it left an ohel. O shratzim, or there were animals that dug a hole and it also as well left an ohel. O she'achalto milchas, there was some type of corrosion that ate away at the ground or at rock and left an ohel above it. V'chein midbach avanim, a collection of stones that left an ohel. V'chein savar shel koros, a stack of beams that left an ohel somewhere. In all of these cases, and here the language changes a little bit. The Kisvei Yad write that the language should not be ma'ahil al hatuma, but rather mevi'in es hatuma. This aligns with language that we saw a number of blot ago, that mevi'in es hatuma is a language that we use by tumas ohel. So if we're in a case where we say that something's mevi'in es hatuma, it means that structure can generate the transference of tuma from one place to another. So all of these cases, none of which are man-made, all of these cases where there is an ohel that is made by these scenarios, by nature, in all of these cases, mevi'in es hatuma, it actually functions as an ohel. However, 2 lines from the bottom, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no. Kol ohel she'eno asi bidei adam eino ohel. Wow, that's like a halachic mic drop moment. There's no such thing as an ohel that's made in nature. That is a wild and drastic halacha, which would change so many things. So, for example, we never allow Kohanim to go, pretty much ever, to go to a cemetery. And sometimes we say, go stand outside, but we'd have to avoid the trees. You don't have to avoid the tree according to Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, an ohel is only an ohel if it's made by man. But all of these things that were listed in this Mishnah that were made by nature, Rabbi Yehuda pushes back and says, sorry, those things are not mevi'in es hatuma. They do not create tuma to transfer like it would under a regular ohel. My time of the Rabbi Yehuda. What is the reason why Rabbi Yehuda has this seemingly outlandish shita that there's no such thing as tumas ohel unless the ohel was made by a person? On the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, answer number 1, Yalif ohel mi Mishkan. We have the word ohel in 2 places, and one of them is from Mishkan, Ksiv Hacha. We have in our case, what does that mean? By the psukim in Sefer Bamidbar Perak Yud Tes, there the pasuk reads, Zos HaTorah Adam ki yamus ba'ohel, the halachos of tumas ohel, and there that pasuk uses the word ohel. And then as well, Uchsiv Hasam, it also says elsewhere, this is in Sefer Shmos Perak Mem, and it says, Vayifros es ha'ohel al ha'mishkan, that when the Mishkan was finally being built, they threw a cover, vayifros, they spread a cover on top of the ohel. So what's the comparison here? What is the Gzeira Shava? So says the Gemara, Malahalan bidei Adam, just like by the Mishkan it was vayifros esa ohel, a human being was the one who created the ohel. Afkan over here, when it comes to the halachos of ohel for Tuma, we also should say bidei Adam. So that's where Rabbi Yehuda gets his shita from. And we're going to be spending a lot of time trying to figure out what Rabbi Yehuda really meant. To be clear, a little bit of a spoiler alert, it's not as dramatic in the end as it sounds like right now, but right now it sounds pretty wild. Even though he has a beautiful Marimakum, it would just shatter and change the world of halacha as we know it if Tumas Ohel was not this way. As well, the Rabbanan, what do you do with that drasha? What do the rabbis do with the Gzeira Shava? Because remember, we have a machlokes. The initial shita in the Mishnah toward the bottom of the page said that all of these naturally made ohels, they do transfer to him. Mevi'in es hatuma. Only Rabbi Yehuda disagreed. So Rabbi Yehuda gave his answer, Gzeira Shava. The Rabbanan, what do you say about the Gzeira Shava of Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara answers 4 lines down, ohel, riba. You looked at the psukim wrong. When we see the word ohel in 2 cases, what we're saying is riba, that we're including more cases, even the cases where they're not asui bidei adam, even those cases are considered to be ohel. Okay, so then the Gemara is going to ask a question on this very strange sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, the Sava Rabbi Yehuda, does in fact Rabbi Yehuda really hold that kol ohel sheinu asui bidei adam eino ohel? Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that in order for an ohel to be an ohel, it has to be man-made, and all ohels that are made by nature are not going to be mevi'in es hatuma? Does he really hold that way? After all, uraminhu, we have a conflict within Tanaic sources. Raminhu always means a conflict in Tanaic sources. We have the Brisa, we have the Mishnah at the bottom of the page, the one that's already within the Gemara. We have the Mishnah there that says Rabbi Yehuda's unique shita. And then we have the following source, which is found in Maseches Para. It's a Mishnah in Maseches Para. And we're going to see here how the families would prepare Kohanim to take care of the Para Aduma. From the time they were children, they avoided all scenarios of Tuma. How did they do that? The Mishnah writes, Chatzeros hayu benuyos b'Yerushalayim al gabe hasela. there were chatzeros, these types of fields or platforms that were built above rock in Eretz Yisrael. V'tachteim, underneath these chatzeros, chalal, there was a space, meaning a space that was enough to make a halachic ohel, mipnei kever hatahom. What is kever hatahom? So what that means is that if you take a look at Rashi in the second line, Dibur hamaschal mipnei kever hatahom, Rashi there writes, Kol shem kever hatahom, v'tumas hatahom shebeshas. Whenever we see this language of kever hatahom or tumas hatahom, what does it mean? Lashon safeku kitahom she'eno galui. It is a language of the unknown, a language of doubt, like the depths that are not revealed. In other words, maybe there's a dead body somewhere buried over here. Nowadays, our cemeteries are very misudar by and large. However, who knows what happened 500 years ago? It doesn't take much for there to be tuma. It's etzem kisaora. It doesn't take much for there to be tuma. So are we allowed to walk around Kohanim? Are they allowed to just walk anywhere, even over sidewalk? We don't know what the landscape was 500 years ago. We have no idea. People for sure died. So they're all dead. So how do we look at it? So, okay, these are shilas. So that's but anyways, in this case, in order to avoid all of that, for these Kohanim, in order to prepare for the Para Aduma, they would build a chalal, they'd build a porch, basically, to avoid the unknown of whether or not there is a mace somewhere buried under the ground. Umevien, Nashin, Ubaros, and then women who were pregnant with children of Kohanim, V'yoltos Sham, they'd give birth there, home birth, a boon for the circumcision business. I would just tell you that, fascinatingly, the midwifery world is fascinatingly affiliated with Moaz. It's not just me. The person who trains me has a whole world of non-Jewish, I call them Haredi Christians. They're so frum. Zero birth control. And what's their Mari Makom? Pasuk and Chumash, be fruitful and multiply. Who are you to stop that process, Meicha? So we have poskim, we have to deal with it. But on its face, they're very frum. They'd walk in with the little ducklings, a kid every 12 months, and they would be asking the rabbi to do a circumcision. It's a Shailan poskim as well. Can a Moel do a bris milah for a goy? That's a Shailan halacha. It's quoted in the Raman, Shulchan Aruch, and Yoredeya. And the Shach there is lenient as long as you don't do it for free because of the Yisra of Lo Sachanim. It gets a whole sugya, a whole gan sugya. I spoke to Rabbi first about it. He's like, pasnish for me to do it. He said this about himself. He's like, I'm not wasting my time doing that. You want to go do that and make a little bit of parnasa, no problem. I said, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Have a good day. So anyways, in this case, they were having these were Jewish women. They were having babies a home birth. They would give birth there in that place, on that porch, so that there's no tumah. Because even if there was in the Tahom, even if there was a mace buried there, no problem. And then umegadlos b'neim sham lepara, they would raise their children there for the sake of the para aduma, to keep them tahor. Umevian shvarim, they'd bring oxen. Ve'al gabein dalsos, they'd put long pieces of wood on there so that the children would sit on top of the wood when they would travel. Why? Because that wood would function as an ohel, so that if they went over a dead body anywhere, the tumah would go up but be stopped by the piece of wood that they're sitting on, and then it would not make the children tameh. The tinokos yoshvin al gabein, the kids would sit on top. The kosos shel even, all of the cups that they would have would not be makabel tumah. They'd be made from stone, which is not makabel tumah. Even biyadehem. And then higilu l'shiluach, when they would get to the water basin in order to get some water to drink, yardu l'sochamayim, they would jump into the water. Umilum ve'alu v'yashvulahem, they would fill up their containers, and then they'd go back up and sit on top of the oxen, on top of the board, on top of the oxen. And then comes Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Omer, don't do that. Don't get off the piece of wood. You spent your whole life of this kid's 8, 9, 10 years old. He's a budding Talmud Chacham. He's about to become a Kohen who's shaykh to do the avoda. Okay, he gets off of the piece of wood for the first time to go get some water, and there's a dead body in the water. It's just not shaykh. Just stay where you are. So Rabbi Yossi says, don't get off the wood. The wood is protecting you because it is an ohel. The wood is protecting you to make sure that you don't become tameh. And then water too. What? I think he's talking about getting water for the paradum. Oh, for the paradum, for the mechatas. Yeah, that's what Rashi says here. I think that's what it says. Yes, thank you.
Right,
yeah, yardu l'sochlaim kasavar haitana milu yadayim ba'inon v'lo she'ishal shel b'chevel. They're having a machlokas in regards to how to collect that water. Nevertheless, that's correct. Thank you for the correction. So they were trying to avoid becoming tamei. V'tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda pushes back on all of this and says lo hayu mevi'in dalsos ela shvarim. They didn't even bother with the dalsos. They didn't bother with the doors. All they did was they just sat on the shvarim. They just sat on the oxen. Why? Because how big is an ohel? A tefach. At a minimum, an ohel is a tefach. The width of an ox is definitely a tefach, and I'm sure many tefach. I'm sure a good couple of feet, maybe more for the very, very big oxen. So what's Rabbi Yehuda saying? Rabbi Yehuda is saying that this thing is considered, that this ox is considered to be an ohel. But what happened to his rule on the bottom of the page that it has to be man-made to be an ohel? Oh, so this is the kasha in Rabbi Yehuda. We started our question 10 lines ago by asking, hey, wait 1 second. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that, that the only way for there to be an ohel is if it's man-made? That doesn't make any sense, because over here he says that a shiur works. And if a shiur works, then everything is done. Man didn't make the shiur. And still, we see that Rabbi Yehuda is relying upon it, and nevertheless, v'katani Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo hayim mevin dalso sel shvarim. So that's a big kasha. Rabbi Yehuda stira and shitas of Rabbi Yehuda. We started at the bottom of the page with a basic assumption of Rabbi Yehuda that an ohel is not an ohel unless it's made by man. We see our contradictory source with Rabbi Yehuda, who seems to say that a shiur, an ox, is considered an ohel, which is problematic. That's a contradiction. And answers the Gemara, it's not as simple as you thought. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Elazar Mod Rabbi Yehuda Kimelo Egrov. Rabbi Yehuda agrees that when it's Kimelo Egrov, that it, we'll learn what this means in a moment, that when it's Kimelo Egrov, seemingly the size of a fist of some kind, so then the halacha is that he agrees that even if it's not made by man, that it does still function as an ohel. Rashi, Dibur Hamaskal Kimelo Egrov, 4 lines into the wide lines, 3/4 of the way down. Ohel sherochav kimelo egro shehu yoser mitefach. It's even bigger than a tefach. It's not a regular size. It's even larger than a tefach. I'm just going to make up this number. Let's assume that it's 2 tefach. Okay. So then here's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. In general, we assume that an ohel has to be made by man, unless it hits the threshold of kimelo egrov, 2 tefach, whatever the shiur is. At that point, even if it's not made by man, it still can be considered to be an ohel. And Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa that says the same thing. Umod Rabbi Yehuda b'shkifin uvinakike haslaim, that when it comes to wood rocks that were displaced and left in ohel, or where rocks crack and they leave some type of ohel, that in those cases he agrees in those cases because they're significantly sized, they're bigger than this minimum size of kimelo egrov. Asks the Gemara, we know that a door is at the very least, it's many egrofin. It's got to be at least as wide as the ox. Why did he say take it off? He holds that if it's larger than kimelo egrof, then it's an ohel anyways. Why bother taking it off? The Katani Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo hayim mevin dalso sel shvarim. What's the difference? They're both ohels. Just leave it on. Who cares? It says the Gemara, 2 answers. Machlokas Abai and Rava. Amar Abai lo hutzruchu lo have dalasos. You're right. They didn't even need to. It just was unnecessary because he was protected by the shiur. If the child was sitting on the saddle on top of an ox, he was protected from every mace that the shiur would walk over. The animal was ohel enough. And 3 lines from the bottom, Rava tries to explain Rabbi Yehuda in a different way. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, lo hayim mevi'in dalsos kol iker. No, there was a specific reason why Rava did not want the boy, or they didn't want the people to sit on top of that animal on a piece of wood. Why? Because that's how King sat. Lo hayim mevi'in dalsos kol iker shemipnei shedaito shaltino gasa alav. Oh, look at me, I'm sitting on this chashav animal with a chashav a piece of wood. Shema yotzi rosho echad me'evarav v'yitma bekever hatahom. An unbelievable level of concern, to the point that we're saying that, okay, he's sitting on this piece of wood, he's like so excited, it's not a normal way to ride an ox, I look so chashav, and then we're afraid he's going to stick his arm out off of the wood, and he may just stick his head out off of the wood, and if he does that, he can become tameh around the kever hatahom. Remember that the kever hatahom is a suffix. It's a suffix. This is such a high standard that Rava is holding us to say that the reason why we're not doing the wood, even though the ox is enough of an ohel, because it's kimelo egrof, it's large enough, it's many tvachim wide, doesn't make a difference. We're just afraid the kid is going to become tameh. If we do put a piece of wood there, better to not put the piece of wood or let him sit straight on the animal. And there's a brisa to support this sheet as well. Tanya Kavase, the Rava, top line of Chafala from the base. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the same, just a quote, we'll read through this quickly. Rabbi Yehuda says, no piece of wood on the animal. He'd get so excited about sitting on the wood. He may stick a hand out Please keep your hands inside the whole time. And if you stick your hand out, you might become tamei. Ella, rather, what should you do? This brisa is now slightly different than what we learned earlier. Ella, vivian shvarm hamitzriim. You should bring Egyptian oxen. What was unique about the Egyptian oxen? Shekrisosehen rechavos. They had very, very wide. They were very wide, right to left. They were very big animals. The hatinokos yoshvin al gabehen, and the children would sit on top of them. V'kosas shel even biyadein. They'd make sure that the kalim that they had were not makabel tuma for the mechatas, for the water, for the paraduma. And then higiu l'shiluach, when they'd get to the water, yardu milum va'alu v'yashua lahan al gabein. Period. That's the brisa, and this is the brisa that supports the shita of Rabbah and trying to explain the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Asks the Gemara, hold on one second. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, what did he say about sleeping under a bed? Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah said, no problem. That wasn't his language, but he said that no hagin haginu shahainu, right? That was the language in our Mishnah that they would sleep. So then ask the Gemara 8 lines down on Kaf Aleph Mabez, that doesn't work. The haremita diyesh bakama agrofim. Your rule that you said that as long as it's made by man, it's an ohel, and if it's not made. If it's not made by man, then it's not an ohel. That's only up to 2 agrofim. But once only it's kimalo agrofim. But once we have a bed, even though it made by man or not made by man, it doesn't make a difference. It's definitely going to be an ohel. So says the Gemara, Kama agrofim v'tzanan Rabbi Yehuda Omer nohagen hayinu shahinu yishenim tachasim b'fnei zakenim. But why isn't it an ohel according to Rabbi Yehuda? No matter what you do, Rabbi Yehuda, you need to say that this is an ohel. Man-made, not man-made, doesn't make a difference. It's definitely an ohel. So how can you say you're yotzei yedei chavasa by sleeping under a bed within a sukkah? So says the Gemara, because you're using the bed the wrong way. Your intentions make a difference. Shiny mita hoel ulagaba asuya. A bed is meant to be slept upon, not slept underneath. Lamai nafkamina, a bunk bed, right? A bunk bed, okay, you're supposed to sleep on the top bunk and you're supposed to sleep underneath. That would be a problem according to this shita. But what is Rabbi Yehuda saying? The problem with the bed and sleeping under it is that you're using it the wrong way, and therefore it's not an ohel. That's not the way it's meant to be used. Who knew that made a difference? Wouldn't you have thought that an ohel is a physical reality? And if you're in an ohel, then you're in an ohel. No, it's not the way that it works. If you're using something the wrong way, and only because you're using it the wrong way does it appear to be an ohel, that's not an ohel. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says, no problem. Says the Gemara, biting back quickly, hold on. Shvarim nami legabana suyan. The same thing would be true for shvarim. Let's say that sitting on top of the animal is great. If you were under an animal, what would happen? Is that considered an ohel? You called it an ohel, didn't you? You said it's ohel enough to stop the tumah. Really, it's not an ohel. The whole point of the animal is not to be an ohel for things underneath it. So then maybe it shouldn't be an ohel to protect the kids. So it says the Gemara, ki asa ravin amar Rebbe Lazar, shiny shvarim. Oxen are different. Ho'elu maginin al haroim bechama mipnei achama uvikshamim mipnei agshamim. Actually, the shepherds actually utilize the underspace underneath an ox. Sounds extremely dangerous. You probably have to really trust your animal to not sit down on you because they're many thousands of pounds. I just read a news article this week about a 1,500-pound ox that got out of a slaughterhouse, smart girl or guy, who totally ran out after catching wind of what was going on and started roaming through the streets, just running around. Could you imagine, like mamish, a bull just running down the streets? Like, what's it called in Spain? Whatever it's called. No, there's a Spanish. I know that. No, there's a Spaniard word. I can't remember what it is. Anyways, doesn't make a difference. The point is that over here we see that there's a secondary purpose for this animal. So if that's true, the bed is no different than the ox. So it says the Gemara. That's how Ravin in the name of Rabbi Lazar answers, is that we have a use for the bottom side of a shore. So it says the Gemara. Well, if that's true, don't you keep your shoes under your bed? Clearly, they did the same thing that some of us do. They store things under their beds. And if you're storing things under your beds, then that's a very normal place to keep things, in which case, yes, it should be an ohel, in which case, Rabbi Yehuda, how can you say you're yotzei yedei chovaso? If the underside of a bed is used to store things, there's no reason why it shouldn't be an ohel, in which case you, Rabbi Yehuda, you're stuck. That means it's an ohel, and you should not be yotzei yedei chovaso by sleeping under a bed inside a sukkah. So says the Gemara, you're right. 1/3 of the way down. Ela Amar Rava, Shiny Shvarim. Really, oxen are different categorically than the bed, no comparison one to the next. They have a skeleton that protects the innards. So the rib cage of the animal is lower, it's closer to the ground, and it protects that which is inside. The the skin and the flesh with is what the animal will be dressed with. And with the bones and sinews, the animal will be sochech, will be protected. So we see the bottom side of the animal does have a very specific purpose. That's not true by a bed. The bottom side of the bed, not inherent in the bed. The space may be used for socks and shoes, no problem. But the actual bed itself, on the bottom side of the bed itself, there's zero value. It's only external to say that shoes are kept there, therefore there's ohel underneath the bed. Here it's inherent in the bottom of the animal that it has that rib cage to protect it. So that's one answer that makes a distinction between shvarim and a mita. V'baisema, halfway down, another possible answer, and this is something that we saw earlier in the Masechta, Rabbi Yehuda l'taime. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, where he says that sleeping under a bed is not a problem and you are yotzei yedei chova. So this is following his own shita. The Omar, he's of the opinion that sukkah diras keva, that when one makes a sukkah, granted, functionally it should be diras arai, but within the realms of diras arai, it has to be to the right, more diras keva, and we need it to be a little bit more of a fixed structure. V'havale mita diras arai, the sukkah ohel keva, below asi ohel arai umevatel ohel keva. That even though it's true the bed might be an ohel, it doesn't make a difference. If the ohel that's inside the sukkah is an ohel arai, you can do whatever you want. It won't change anything. It's an ohel arai. And he is of the opinion that lo asi ohel arai umevatel ohel keva. That when we have a bed, and a bed is considered an ohel arai because they're very portable, they're moved around a lot, and because they're moved around a lot back in the day at least, because their beds were moved around a lot, it's considered an ohel arai. And Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that this bed that's inside of your sukkah can't ruin your experience in the sukkah. And therefore, even if you're underneath the bed, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because he's of the opinion of lo asi ohel arai mavato lo el keva, that the bed can't ruin the sukkah, therefore, even if you're under the bed, you can be yotzei. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. We have a dissenting opinion on that. Rabbi Shimon de Amar Nami sukkah diras keva po'inon. He also agrees that the sukkah has to be more fixed, but asi ohel arai but he doesn't agree with you. You, Rabbi Yehuda, you were of the opinion that an ohel arai cannot ruin an ohel keva. Rabbi Shimon's of the opinion that it can, that an ohel arai can ruin an ohel keva. So says the Gemara, as a klutz kasha, that's what they're arguing about. You can't ask a shaila from one Tana against another. They just must hold different things. It's not like you're bringing an anonymous source that you have to qualify. Rabbi Shimon says X, and Rabbi Yehuda says Y. What's the problem? That's Rabbi Shimon. That a bed that's inside a sukkah, it's an ohel arai, and it can be mevatel an ohel keva. And Umar Savar, the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, as we've seen now twice in this Masechta, is that he holds lo asi ohel arai mevatel ohel keva. That one who has an ohel arai inside of a sukkah, it cannot ruin an ohel keva. And that explains the various shitas that we saw in our Mishnah of the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon on the one side and Rabbi Yehuda on the other, with various approaches within the Gemara in order to explain those shitas. That brings us to the two dots. Amar Reb Shimon. Almost done. We're going to get to the end of the page. Amar Reb Shimon. Ma'aseh b'tevi avdo, the story that we learned in our Mishnah about the Eved who slept under the bed. Tanya, the Brisa writes, not our Mishnah, Tanya, Brisa, a similar story. Amar Reb Shimon, mi sichaso, keyword, from the dialogue that we saw in our Mishnah, mi sichaso shel Rabban Gamliel, lamadnu shnei dvarim. What are the two things that we learned from the conversation of our Mishnah? Number one, lamadnu she'avodim p'tur min sukkah. We learned that an Eved is pater from the sukkah. Their chiyuvim are different. That's number one. We also learned from Reb Shimon in this brisa and in our Mishnah, the first and third shitas of our Mishnah, that you are not yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah if you are under a bed inside a sukkah. Says the Gemara, what does misichasa mean? V'leima midvarav, he's a posek from his words. He said a davar, he said a dibur, he said a dibra, whatever language you want to say. Misichaso, what does that even mean? So it should have been midvarav shel Rabban Gamliel. So says the Gemara, a very, very important line, one that we are familiar with. Milsa agav urcha kamashmalan. We are learning a secondary point here. The fact that this brisa says that we're learning from the sicha of and not midvarav of that we're learning from the conversation and not just from his words is to teach us the following. Ki hada amar Rav Acha bar Ada. Some say that Rav Acha bar Ada said it. The Amri Lo, some say that it was Rav Acha bar Ada, Amar of Hamnuna, Amar Rav. One of those two people. And what did they say? And this brings us 3 lines right before the Mishnah. This will bring us to the new Mishnah. Minayin, and I'm going to read the correct girsa, which is found here on the side. Minayin shafilu sichas chulin shel talmidei chachamim tzricha Talmud. How do we know that even casual conversations of talmidei chachamim need Talmud? They need to be learned. They need to be analyzed. Shene'emar, like the first parak in Tehillim, va'alehu lo yibol, that the leaves will not wilt. The leaves will not fall apart. So we assume that the leaves are not the ikar part of the tree. The ikar part of the tree is the wood. That's the Talmud Chacham. Okay, the alehu lo yibol, the words that come out of his mouth, besicha, those are the leaves. The lo yibol, they're not going to fall apart. They're not going to wilt, and therefore everything that a Talmud Chacham does needs to be analyzed. That's really that's a beautiful thing. When people live their lives to such a level where everything they do can be analyzed latova, that's an unbelievable level. Beautiful. New Mishnah, 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. If a person takes a bed frame and puts schach over it, take off the mattress, put the schach on top of it, the halacha is that it's kosher. That's the Tana Kama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, not necessarily. It has to be freestanding. Well, let's see what this means in the Gemara. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What is Rabbi Yehuda's shita that if it's not Yechol Alamud Bifnei Atzma, that it's psula? So it says the Gemara, Pligi bar Reb Zera v'Rabbi Abba bar Mama. This is a machlokes in the Amoraim, how to understand the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who was a Tana. Chad Amar mipnei she'ein lo keva, because a bed is not a keva. I keep thinking in my head about these little pack and plays that little babies use, and you can put them in one room, and you can literally pick it up and move it and put it in. They're portable. The beds that we have in our homes, it's much more annoying to move our beds, but their beds were seemingly in some way, shape, and form more portable. And the bed is ein la keva, and maybe that's why Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that it has to be omed bifnei atzma. However, the other of these Amoraim says it's problematic because the schach is resting on something that is makabel tuma. This should ring a bell for those of you who've built sukkahs before and learned these sukkahs, the famous Chazon Ish of Maimed de Maimed. We don't even allow for a sukkah to be built with metal at all. It has to be resting and built upon only that which is makabel tuma and not that which isn't makabel tuma. Other way around. Only that which isn't makabel tuma, and you can't use any metal. So there are some people who got creative and they came up with a way to build a sukkah in a way that's both sturdy and doesn't use any metal. Most people are not of that opinion. Most people who build sukkahs do use metal to support the wood upon which the schach will go. But this is the principle that's framed out here in the Gemara by one of the Amoraim, who says that the concern of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah was that the sukkah is made out of something that's makabel tuma, and that's problematic. My beinayu. What is the difference between these two reasons of the Amoraim, where one says ein la keva and the other says that the schach is sitting on something that is makabel tuma? The difference is, the difference would be if one were to make a perfectly metal frame of barzel, very hard metal, very sturdy, put the metal poles into the ground, and put schach on top of that. According to the one who says Rabbi Yehuda's real concern was about kvius, Hare yesh la keva. This sukkah is just wonderful, perfectly kosher, nothing to worry about. And the same would be true if you take the poles of the bed and you hammer them into the ground. The whole thing would be kosher because he's not concerned about the other person's concern about makabel tuma. Last of the short lines. But according to the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who was of the opinion that the concern here was about being makabel tuma, then you've got a problem. Then you have a sukkah that's not kosher. We know for sure your poles that lay just under your schach cannot be metal. That we know. There have to be other pieces of wood. So many years ago, the schach world came out with these white sukkahs that kind of interlock. They just kind of fall into place. And then there's a metal bar that goes across the top. But they had to come up with a solution. So they did. They would tell you to get pieces of wood. They were 2x4s. And there was a cut at each end of the 2x4, the exact width of the sukkah. And the 2x4 would land and hold the sukkah at the right length, at the right distance apart, and that would be the wood upon which the schach would rest, because if it was on the metal, that's a violation of this rule. That would not be allowed. And this case of the very sturdy metal frame would be a difference between these two sources in the Amoraim who are trying to explain Rabbi Yehuda. And then the last 4 lines of the night, Amar Abaye, Lo shanu el asmach. This whole conversation is only talking about where the schach is resting directly on the bed. Aval sikech al gav hamita kshera. But if it's raised, so there's a bed, and then above the bed you create another frame in order to rest the schach, that's totally different. My taima. Why is there a difference? The manda amar lefi she'ein la keva. According to the one who says that there's no kviyas, that's his concern about Rabbi Yehuda. Even he would say that it's kosher here because hariyesh la keva, we have a separate frame to hold up the schach. So whereas the bed may be a temporary type of location, no problem, I understand that. But here Rabbi Yehuda would say kosher because the schach is resting on a more stable source. And according to the other opinion in the Amoraim, that's not what's happening here. This new frame that's resting over the bed to make the schach hover above the bed, that is not going to be makabel tuma, so it will be kosher. So that's how the Gemara concludes here in trying to understand Rabbi Yehuda with 2 different sheets than the Amoraim as to why he says that this case in our Mishnah of making schach on top of the bed, he says would potentially be problematic. We spoke about the 2 different possibilities as to why that's the case, and Abaye's qualification where even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it's kosher, which is where the schach is elevated above the bed on its own frame. We're going to stop right here. Emir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll be in person by Tzvi, 3040 Sherwin, is that correct? 3040 Sherwin. We will be starting sharply at 8:40. If we all plan to daven Marav there, we can have Marav afterwards. I'll plan to daven Marav there. And we will record. When we're done with shiur, we'll stop, we'll daven Marav, and we'll record again when Rabbi Robinson starts, and I'll post. We'll have live Zoom there as well. And I think that's all for tonight. Wishing you all a beautiful night.